Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, or depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you for joining for another installment of Industry Insights. This week, in case you cannot tell, I am super excited. One of my absolute favoriteest, mostest, bestest Veemers ever is joining the call, mostly because she knows the difference between BC and DR. And so we're going to be visiting around one of the concepts around cyber resiliency today. Emily, as always, thank you so much for joining and for putting up with my humor.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, so this week we're going to get a little bit nerdy, right? So the series so far, we've been talking about the Ransomware Trends 2024 report. This is our third annual edition of 1,200 cyber victims. All organizations self-identified that got hit at least one time. Average was 2.1 hits per year. We asked them, third-party analyst firms, not Veeam customers, third-party analyst firms, go out, ask all these questions. And this week, we're going to dig into the technologies of what got hit, the technologies of what those victims are now using as lessons learned moving forward, etc. So while we get ready to share the data, I do just want to encourage you at home, tell us where you're from. This was a worldwide survey, 1,200 victims from organizations all around the world. Good representation across APJ, across Latin America. I'll be there at the end of next month. Across all of EMEA, a lot of Europe, and then of course North America as well. So please tell us where you're from, and then just pile on in the chats, and we'll be lighting up the map in just a few minutes. But okay. Let's get into the first data point, because this is one that certainly, as to data protection individuals, this one I think is always very, very intriguing. So the question was, did the threat actor attempt to modify or delete the backup repositories as part of the ransomware attack? And unfortunately, in 96% of all the attacks that were recorded, the bad actor did try to go after the backup repositories. And unfortunately, in 76%, so basically 3 out of 4, the organization's ability to save itself was encumbered. And to kind of put this into a track, I use this story a lot, but it's too much fun, so I'm going to have to do it again. So we've got a buddy, Dave, right, on our team. Let's assume that we're out on a team building event, and Dave has thrown me overboard off a boat in the middle of the water, right? So now Dave wants to sell me a life preserver. Now, if I can swim back to the boat, I don't have to buy his life preserver. If there's other things floating in the water, I don't have to buy his life preserver. So if Dave wants to sell me a life preserver, he's going to try to remove my ability to save myself. And unfortunately, that's a standard play. 96% of the time, the bad actors being like Dave, right? And in 3 out of 4 cases, they successfully remove the victim's ability to save themselves. That is, and I don't want to get this technical term wrong, but ugly. As far as silly and dangerous. What are your thoughts when you see this? Are you surprised that this continues to be a standard play for bad actors?
Well, first off, if Dave threw you overboard, the last thing I would do is pay him to save you, because I would not trust the life preserver that he's going to be throwing into the water at that point, right? And it's the same thing for the bad actors, right? They put you in the situation because they want that payment, and the last thing that you want to do is pay them, because who knows what you're going to get back, right? There's stories of people getting, keys, the wrong decryptor keys back. There are stories of people finding out that the malware or whatever it was that encrypted their backups didn't encrypt, but corrupted, and now it's pretty much useless to them. Or maybe even putting in a backdoor into said decryptor key, and then it just lets the bad guys in again once you figure out that you've gotten things up and running, right? So, I mean, I've heard multiple stories just from talking to different types of users out in the field, out at different events. So, I mean, the number one thing I think is when you're talking about negotiations and having conversations with said person who has done something bad to you, take it with a grain of salt and ensure that you are doing everything that you can to preserve your own life, and looking at all the other ways that you could possibly bounce back or get back back up from this event. So yeah, no, this doesn't surprise me at all, especially with the conversations that we have. 100%. I think the majority of people have seen their backups, their backup server, any of those things in some way, shape, or form was compromised or was the main target that they went after. Because again, right, the threat actors, they're just trying to make sure that you're going to pay them, and so whatever they could do to make it harder for you to not pay them, that's what they're going to go after first. So you need to protect it. You need to protect that data. You need to ensure that you're having a great strategy in place, so that way you're not going to be treading water like Mr. Buffington is.
Yeah, and I think it's probably safe to say we've heard the rumor that certainly the developers that are responsible for the encryptor are probably, those first class folks. The folks responsible for the decryptor may not be on quite the same par, as far as the QA of that process goes. Now, that said, we've also heard reports where a lot of these bad actors recognize that this is a business, right? And so you are more likely to pay for the key if you're actually dealing with a bad actor who has a reputable wand to do that decryption from. So certainly I think there's some really interesting dynamics there. I will also point out that while we don't have the data in this week's segment, certainly one of my favorite pieces of data that comes out of that report is the number of folks where the organization paid the ransom and still could not recover, right? It's 1 out of 3 that pay still couldn't recover, whereas only 15% of victims said, no, we did not pay, we recovered ourselves. I'm going to guess, and Em, call me out on this if you don't agree, I'm going to guess that if 15% said, no, we did not pay, we just recovered, it's interesting that's about the same percentage of data that we see on this screen where it says we had backups to recover from, right? Because if you don't, then that other option is off the menu along the way. So what I want to do now is kind of pivot this. So in the survey, we asked organizations, how bad was it and things like this data around, did they get after the backup repository? We did also ask them some lessons learned. We asked them, okay, so not at the time, but now, what are you doing from a technology perspective? And I think if this is the cause, then let's call this the effect. So organizations were then asked, moving forward, does your organization have, and these are all fancy buzzwords, right? Offline, air gap, immutable. I'm going to dumb it down for the kids at home. Survivable backups, right? Do you have something to recover from? What we did here, love tape. Tape still matters, right? So tape is still on the fray. But notice here that about half of organizations in the green wedges say they have some type of either on-prem storage that has immutability or locking, and or they're using object storage that also has a lockable component or persistence. I think it's interesting. The clouds are coming top of mind here, right? So whether it's a managed cloud offering BAS or DRAS, or perhaps a self-managed cloud using hyperscale. But I love the fact that, if they chose either the blues, we get 85%. If they chose either the greens, they get 75%. So Em, 3 out of 4 folks now have an on-prem capability that can being the operative verb, immutable. 85% of folks have a cloud that can be. But surely, and put on your Veeam hat for a second, it sounds so complicated to make storage immutable. I mean, there's so many, how many checkboxes is it to make a storage layer immutable? It's like 1.
Yep.
One.
It should be 1.
Check a box, right? Check a box, put a date stamp on it, and call it good. Why aren't more folks doing this?
I think it's just still people trying to catch up with, the technology that they've either invested in or maybe not even knowing, right? I think there's been multiple different times where I've gone into different type of organizations, right? And they think that their backups are immutable, and then come to find out so-and-so didn't check a box, or so-and-so did XYZ and actually ended up not pointing to the immutable backup target, or maybe they're running out of space. So then they decided to make some changes in the background, right? And nobody ever told them. There's a myriad of reasons why some people might not be leveraging immutability, but I think, what we learn here, and those that have actually have been hit by some type of event is that they have to use immutability moving forward. And you know what? And this is a great slide, great statistic, because the way that you look at it is now you can see customers that are actually coming up with the strategies, right? They're looking at this as a lesson learned the hard way of we need to have immutable backups and we need to have redundancy with those backups. We need to have it on-prem so that way we can be able to recover at a quick rate from, maybe just simple things like somebody deleted some files, some folders, and we can do restore really quickly because it's local to us. And we need a plan for that big, oh no moment where everything is gone on-prem. We don't have access to our on-prem infrastructure. There's a fire, flood, blood, whatever it may be type of situation, right? And we have our data. It is stored somewhere else. It is off-site. It is, again, immutable. And we can leverage some type of cloud technology in order to get that data back up and running, whether it's in that hyperscaler infrastructure or rebuilding back on-prem. So this is ideally planning for that strategy of anything can happen inside of that data loss event. And truly, it is one of the best strategies out there to have. It's that basic 3-2-1-1-0 backup strategy of getting multiple copies of your data stored two separate places. And in this case, both of them being immutable, which is definitely not going to hurt you in the long run.
Yeah, I would love to see that in the future we see these numbers add up to 300%, right? So when it's on disk, it's immutable disk, and when it's on tape, it's on air gap tape, and when it's in the cloud, it's in the immutable cloud. I mean, I would love to see it eventually go there. I do think there's two takeaways to look at here. So certainly for the senior executives that are listening on the call, one of the things that was really inherent in the survey was we did ask 3 different personas: the backup admin who is responsible for remediation, the security professional who's responsible for prevention, and the CISO or other stakeholder executive. And what we often found was in many of the questions, the CISO executive was perhaps overly optimistic compared to some of the decisions being made in the technical trenches. And so I would just challenge you, if you're a C-level or VP, go back to your IT teams and say, hey, I know I approved that PO for immutable capable storage. Did we hit the checkbox, right? And that's and by the way, I say that with a little bit of humor because in some backup software, it's not always just a single checkbox. So let's be transparent on that. Also, I got to give props out to some of the IT pros out there because there is a give and take on this, right? So the benefit of immutable storage is there's less ways for the bad actor to affect it. The downside is it is going to increase your storage footprint, right? So if you're instead of doing some of the overwrites, you're going to need to plan for a little bit more because not only can the bad actor not overwrite your stuff, neither can you. And right, so there is a little bit of a bloat that comes out of that. And so really, there is a business decision to be made between, let's call it penny wise, pound foolish, right? So I want to optimize my efficiency, and yet I want to make sure I can survive this existential threat of a bad actor. Make sure that everyone in the room agrees on which choice you made on that trade-off, because if you tell your CISO, yeah, we didn't turn on immutability because we were saving money on our storage budget, that's what we call a resume generating event. So anyway, all right, with that in mind, let's take a look at the map, because when we talk about resume generating events, one of the stats, which was actually in our last report, was like 47% of all IT pros are looking to change organizations. And that might also mean changing addresses. So how about we look on the map and see where that's coming from? So we're looking at here. So courtesy of Emily, we got Arizona representing in the house. So again, thank you for coming out for that. We got Ohio representing, and of course, the great state of Texas that I call home. Let's see, down in South America, there's a little green dot that we love and call El Salvador, but I'm kind of hoping that some of my friends from Brazil will light the map up, because I'm going to come see y'all in August, and it's going to be no fun if you're not lighting up the. There you go.
I'll be there in September. Come on, guys.
Really?
Yeah.
I've heard that Brazil and Argentina have some fantastic wine. You should try that while you're down there.
Oh, yeah.
All right. And then if we go over to the old country, we can see that that Romania looks like they're in the house. And also Germany. I will be in Germany in September. So if you want to talk about disaster recovery and cyber resiliency, come ping me for that. I'm going to be trying to be in and out before Oktoberfest. There you go. All right. And I do love that Brazil chimed in because it's just such a massive piece of green on the map. Okay, so let's dig back into some data. So we talked about job one is disable the backups, disable your ability to recover save yourself, right? So that you can avoid paying the ransom along the way. The next thing that I thought was really interesting data that we could kind of share in on was there's two myths that I think Hollywood has taught us about cyber attacks. One is that we talked about that magic decryption key, that one, right? So, some teenager runs in the room, types in the magic key, and okay, we're good, right? It's not how that works, right? And that there's this idea that for somehow, even though the bad actor had 6 months to navigate your environment, get everything loaded, pull all the triggers at once, somehow 30 seconds later, you paid the Bitcoin, you type in the key, and all of a sudden you're up and running. That is myth number one that we should just debunk. Myth number two, oh heck, we'll just wipe the servers, that makes them clean, and then restore the data from our last good backup if you're in that 20%, and then you're going to be fine. Except that experience only worked in 1 out of 7 of the bad actors, or of the victims in this attack. See that, Emily, that green wedge and that 14%? Only 14% of respondents said, no, all of our infrastructure was ready to go. We could just wipe it and start over again. For the other 86% of respondents, they answered yes to at least some of their systems were not allowed to be wiped and immediately restored when they started working on their remediation plan. And on average, 31% of their server infrastructure was not allowed to be wiped. And that could be, the ones I came up with were insurance, legal, and forensics, right? So now I'm sure you have a perfect driving record. I do not. And I can tell you that when I've had a couple fender benders over the years, I could not start the recovery of my car until the insurance person came out and took pictures and judged their own value, et cetera. And if you have a warranty, that actually applies. In other cases, legal, law enforcement, forensics, hey, we got to figure out how they got in so that we can make sure they don't come back. I mean, I know you spend a lot of time on the front line. How does this feel to you as far as the experience that you hear from other victims?
I mean, again, I think a lot of it has came down to people learning the hard way, right?
Yeah.
I think it's so important to understand the type of business that your organization is in, right? So understanding the type of sector, whether that's going to be government, public, private, knowing who you do business with and the type of data that your infrastructure kind of has or handles, because that's going to also implicate what is going to be the process of your recovery moving forward, right? If you work for a government and all of a sudden you have a ransomware event that has taken place within your environment, it's gonna go through a long process to understand, okay, who had access into your environment and why, who are the threat actors, and going through a list of investigation. So for that example, number one, that's probably where we saw the 38% not being able to wipe it, right?
Yep.
It was understanding who was the bad actor, what did they have access to, what was the type of data that they were looking for, and then tracing that all down. And essentially at that point in time, it's like a crime scene, and they kind of have to put a freeze or a hold on it so that way they can do their proper investigation. And if you don't have a secondary infrastructure that has been 100% siloed, because I've heard it multiple different ways in how they were able to leverage a secondary DR site or their cloud environment, it just kind of depends based off of the actual organization themselves and how well they did their segmentation. But ideally, you want to have that secondary infrastructure or a way out to be able to perform that recovery process in the event that your environment is put on freeze for the time that investigation or insurance or legal has to go through their process of vetting that data set. But then the other thing too, keep in mind, right, Jason, is that at this point, SLAs are gone, right? Essentially, it's just recovering at fast as your actual ability. And when I say ability, that doesn't come down to the speed of recovery from a technology standpoint. It comes down to due diligence. How much due diligence are you, your team, and everybody else that you have involved inside of this ransomware event are going to put forward when it comes to ensuring that that data is going to be clean, free from malware, free from any backdoors, you're fixing any vulnerabilities before you recover that into a new clean environment. So due diligence becomes the new SLA de facto that everybody has to start thinking about when it comes to ransomware.
Yeah, one of the things I like about what you said was the idea of having that isolated type of recovery infrastructure, right? So, when you get a flat tire, you know that whatever it was that caused the flat tire is not going to affect the spare that's in your trunk, right? Now, but when we think about when that bad actor has had several months to get into your environment. And so if you can easily and transparently and seamlessly get to that secondary set of servers that's running in your alternate data center, so can the bad actor. Right. If your users can seamlessly get to the copies of data that are running in the cloud, so can the bad actor. Right. And so it becomes really important that the very first thing you do. I was in a DR exercise up in Cambridge, Massachusetts about 2 weeks ago. And one of the things that we talked about was we assume everything on the gold wire has been compromised. So we're going to light up a silver wire that is otherwise untouched. And we're only going to recover infrastructure onto the silver wire. We're only going to reroute users onto the silver wire. And if it's on gold, we assume it to be toxic. And having that mentality of coming into secondary infrastructure can be really, really empowering. Let's look at what happened of those users that tried to recover. Where did they go if they couldn't use all of their existing infrastructure? And so in this case, organizations were asked, of your most recent recoveries from ransomware, where did you recover the data to? And again, you see the green are all the different options of what was available on-prem. The blue were the options that were cloud hosted. I like the fact that by a very small margin, both clouds come in top of mind, and then the three are underneath. Gosh, this time goes by fast. We're 22 minutes in, but I want to get at least a quick reaction from you on this one. 75% of folks were able to recover to a cloud, whereas 86% of folks were able to recover to infrastructure that was either they replaced, they wiped, they bought new, they had secondary laying around, whatever that case is. And I love the fact that these two numbers add up to 160%, meaning most organizations' recovery plan includes the flexibility to use metal if they've got it and it's clean, and or a cloud if they think that's more suitable to the business and the kind of recovery, right? So, you have a problem in one rack, fail it to the next rack. You have a problem in a data center, you got to go someplace else. I love that it looks like the majority of organizations, 160%, right? So the majority of organizations have that overlap. Talk about mobility and the importance of being able to relocate our resources. They went down in Dallas, they woke up in Arizona. That's not trivial, is it?
No, and it shouldn't be in this day and age, right? Like I mentioned before, I've worked with a lot of different types of organizations, and just depending on their actual strategy to begin with, right? Majority of them are using some type of multi-cloud strategy, whether that's running workloads in, one of the hyperscalers of your choice, as well as running some on-prem, or even using managed services from a managed service provider, right? So having those multiple different ways of being able to recover are only going to help you in the long run. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I was working with a managed service provider that was based in Texas, and they were talking about how a user got hit by a ransomware event, and they ended up having to run their entire workload stack inside of that MSP. So that user wasn't able to run anything on-prem. They ended up having to recover data sets inside of the MSP, so that way they were able to maintain and hit certain applications and actually hit certain windows that they needed for their business, to be able to maintain services for their users. So, I mean, that was 2 weeks ago. Years ago, I had customers that had to, start to run their data sets inside of Azure, and it wasn't a choice for them to do that, but they were forced to do it just because of, the fact that they didn't have access to on-prem infrastructure at the time, and it accelerated their multi-cloud strategy, multi-cloud adoption very, very quickly.
I bet.
So,
all right,
so yeah.
We won't hit the map again just in the spirit of time, because I do have one more data point that I want to cover, but I do got to give props to, we saw Brazil pop up in the very last second, but I also want to shout out to Luxembourg and our friends over there for adding to the map on the second one, so along the way. All right, but one more data point that I really want to get your feedback on, and that is, so we talked about the protecting the backups. We've talked about planning for secondary infrastructure. The last part is, don't reinfect yourself during recovery, right? And so interesting stat here. So only 37% say that when they restored their data, when they were remediating from ransomware, they restored it in some kind of an isolated sandbox, test area, quarantine, whatever you want to call that. And then as soon as they thought it was clean, then they put it into production. Now, two things. If you don't do that, then you are risking reinfection, right? You're reintroducing what could have latent malware in it right back in the production environment again. And I'm going to go on a tirade for a second to say, look, the average victim got hit 2.1 times. Doesn't mean they got breached 2.1 times. It means they got asked for ransom 2.1 times. And I think the difference there is when they didn't clean house or they reinfected themselves along the way. In fairness, though, that is not a trivial piece of work either. To automate and orchestrate recovery into a sandbox, keep it isolated, check it, and then if it's positive, restore it into production. If it's not positive, ratchet back a version or two and then try it again. That's not a simple thing, and not everybody can do that.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, number one, though, is like, so if you can't do it, number one, you should be looking at a company that starts with a V, ends at an M, may or may not be on the screen right now, right? But there's certain ways that we can help to accelerate this process, so that way it makes it easier for users to be able to clean and ensure that that data is going to be actually free from malware before you're recovering that back into production. And I've worked with users, with customers that have been hit by ransomware, and they've gone through this process themselves. In fact, yeah. We actually had a organization that when they upgraded to one of the next versions, right, that they actually had found some remnants of leftover bits that were from a previous incident that had taken place probably a few years before. So, I mean, there's things where maybe we thought we did our due diligence, but then we didn't. But again, like I mentioned, your SLA is going to be based off of how good are you and your teams going to be when it comes to cleaning and ensuring that that data is going to be safe, to ensure that you're not risking that reinfection during restore. And having a sandbox and being able to test and leverage the security tools that you need is key here, to make sure you're doing that correctly.
Yeah, I would take this as homework. This is one where you might want to screenshot it. Also, if you download the report from the QR code in the upper right-hand corner, all these charts are available, right? You can download them, put them in your own data, put them in your own blogs, whatever you need to do to have a hard conversation with, okay, so are we just restoring back and then scanning it really fast, or are we just restoring and then hoping, right? There's a lot of question from the chat: how do we protect DAS repositories using Veeam against ransomware? So there is a hardening guide that you should take a look at for that. So if you search for Veeam hardening best practices, is that the that would be the right way to look for that. But all right, so we have 1 minute left. I want to make sure that you do get a chance to hit the QR code one more time. You can also find it in the URL on the bottom right hand corner here. So I want to also give props out. So on Thursday, we've got July 11th, the V100 show. We're going to be simplifying Kubernetes. Not everyone can spell Kubernetes, but we're going to go a little past that and talk about simplifying how to embrace that technology. And then next week, on Industry Insights, we'll be back and we'll be looking at incident response plans. We'll be looking at processes and methods. And then you can also, great ad, also reach out to your local SE and they can help you with that as well. And partners, we got like 57,000 partners that will help you harden your repositories along the way. So with that, Em, you got a couple thousand folks listening to you. What's that last 30-second piece of wisdom? What do you need them to hear and take away from today?
Well, number one, make sure that you have a process in place, you know your technology, and you know the people, because those three things are going to be crucial when it comes to recovering after a ransomware event.
And mine would be, it is better to have those hard questions with the other teams before the attack instead of the why version after the attack. All right, with that, thanks for joining another installment of Industry Insights. I think this is episode like 169. We've been doing this for like 4 years now. So hopefully this continues to help. Hopefully it helps you have hard conversations. Emily, again, thanks for joining as always. And to everyone else, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.